people and the landowners to do that. And we want to make sure that that is what happens here in Rockford and happens here in Northern Illinois. So I'm going to turn it over to Domenico, who has done a great job of preparing an alternative design, and I'm going to let him share that with you and not steal any of his thunder.
Okay, so can go to the next slide. So I'm not going to say much about this. We all know what the issues are. Only one thing. I taught landscape architecture at the University of Guelph for a few years. And if a student came to me with this plan, it would be an automatic fail. And I will explain why. Next slide. Oh, okay. And this is the other component that they're adding as well. So they're expanding to the west. We all know about this. The roads marked in red are the ones that are no longer needed in my design. So we can, when we do an economic assessment, which of course they will want to do, the construction of these roads is taken out of that equation. And the question to me remains, why is the Prairie so expandable and the parking lot so precious? That road can be easily realigned to go around the Prairie and still maintain the same service. It's not hard to build roads. They do it all the time. We witness this every summer that we drive through our highways. Why is this happening? It boggles the mind. And I put this slide in because that's the initial survey, and you can see on the survey everywhere it's marked Prairie, 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 Prairie. And my diagram there shows what is left in all of the state of grade A and grade B gravel prairie. All we have left of grade A and grade B gravel prairie can fit on this project site, and we still have room to spare. That's how endangered this is. That's how precious it is. We don't do this with other things that we consider precious. And one wonders, how can this happen? Well, it happens because the historical model that we've used is profit-driven. Usually current big picture strategy. This is what's being used. The metrics of efficiency, what's the metric of efficiency? Save as much money as possible, lowest cost possible. Tactics, reduce amount, cost of materials. So after you do a plan, there's a whole process called value engineering, which is just a fancy word of where can we cut more costs. The strategies, compress dimensions and scope, but in this case, they haven't done that. Goals, create the smallest space that can accommodate use. And they have not done that here as well, and I will show why. And principles, there are no principles. It's too late, everything has been decided. There are no more principles to consider. Human values, there are no human values. That's the historical model that has been used in development, but not only in development, it's the historical model that has given humanity the opportunity to excuse themselves from putting people into slavery, from the colonial mentality. So this is the model that we're fighting. Now, the second model, the triangle, is what's normally called cradle to cradle. So in the first model, we have profit drives everything. In the second model, we said, well, wait a minute. And this model was developed after the 60s. So in 62, Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, and the light went on, and people really started to look very carefully at what we're doing. Well, over the years, this took many years to develop. So we came up with this model, which seemed reasonable, right? Cradle to cradle, and says, okay, we can't put profit first, but let's do something better. let's make profit, community, and environment equally. So they have equal value. So we're not going to destroy the environment. We're going to take care of the community. Well, that's an interesting equivalent, but it's a false equivalent because we cannot put the economy and the planet at equal value. That's the fallacy in all this. So if those are equal values, when we come to the decision, 99% of the time, we're going to go back to the first model. Because if the ecology and the economy are equal, well, then we can go either way. So what's happening is we're still using the profit-driven model, but the cradle-to-cradle model is giving us all kinds of green rhetoric to justify our actions. But that's all it is, it's rhetoric. So more recently, the United Nations scientific community called that we should use another model. And it's not a model of equivalence, it's a model of dependency. And the model to my left, the extreme left, says what's more important to us? And of course, the planet, the biosphere, because that's what sustains our life. What is second important to us? It's the community, the people, because that's where we love, where we have our feelings, where we have our ties, where we have our culture. And the economy is at the center, but it's less important. Why? Because we're the ones that created the economy. The biosphere created us. We're the ones that created the economy. So it's a reverse of the first model. And this is the model that we should be adopting. This is the model that's being promoted with the United Nations by most up-to-date people in the planet. Since we can manipulate the economy, we can change it. And it's interesting that the free market system, as we know it today, which drives our economy, is based on a book by Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. And that book says everybody has the right to pursue wealth and happiness. We have a right to do that, great. But we conveniently dismiss another book that Adam Smith wrote. And that book was called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And Adam Smith meant that to be the foundation, the moral compass of the wealth of nations. So it says, yes, you can pursue your wealth, you can pursue your happiness, but you have a moral responsibility to get back to the community. So once you get wealthy, great, now help everybody else. And he used the word empathy in that. So we have to have empathy for others. And now we know today, through the work of Carl Safina and others, that what we thought of simple creatures or simple things, simple life that we took for granted, is actually very intelligent life. In his latest book, Becoming Wild, he talks about wild creatures having cultures. They have a culture. And so we're learning more and more as we go about our world, and we should not take it for granted like they do here. Remember, in a gram of soil, there are hundreds of thousands of little creatures there. It's not dirt, it's a whole universe. Yeah. So how do we use that model? So I took that model and say, okay, forget about what they've done because it's based on the profit-driven model. What can be done if we use the biosphere model? And one thing I wanted to do was make sure that the airport got what they wanted. I did not change any of the configuration of their layout. I changed the configuration of their layouts, but I did not change the footprints. So all the areas that they demarcate as needed, they got. I have not changed anything of their functions or size of building or anything like that. So what's left? So what's left, if you notice on the plan where I have A, B, C, and D, A is a huge employee parking lot. Huge parking lot. Then B, C, and D are classified as stormwater detention management. Basically, they're a hole in the ground, right? So I was curious. I said, I wonder how this relates to the prairie. So I traced the outlines of those areas and I placed it on the prairie. And lo and behold, if we only find other solutions for that, we can save the prairie. And the airport gets all they want for their function. They get everything that they ask for. But we can save the prairie by eliminating the outdated, really outdated motives of a huge open parking lot and these detention ponds. Next slide. And I also wanted to find out how best to save space and how to serve the cargo airplanes. So I went right next door to the Prairie. This is just above the Prairie. And this is Rockford Airport. And this is how they're serving those planes. So the planes come in and they can turn on either side. So that's the model I used to decide how the airport can function properly with the planes that I'm proposing. And also, I want to point out to you again, a large expansive parking lot, which is rarely used in full. This has to be the main handicap of planning. Why do we need these huge parking lots? Okay. So this is what came out of it. So the Prairie is saved. I kept all the footprints except for the parking lot and except for the storm detention ponds. The planes can come in and out. With that plan, I can serve 25 normal size cargo planes, like the ones you saw in the previous slide, and we still have room to serve 3 or 4 of the really large cargo planes. These are behemoths. We still have room to serve those, are the same planes that they show on the west side. The truck route, you can see, is kept to the bottom. The roads are gone, and there's a quick in and out for the trucks onto a Beltline, and then there's a small employee entrance and exit into the employee parking lot. Next slide. Okay, so then I got curious again, and I overlaid the same areas that I took out onto the area that I designated as the plane service area. And lo and behold, it's the same area, practically the same area. So I took out those areas which are money draining areas. The parking lots doesn't make the airport any money. The storm detention ponds don't make the airport any money. In fact, they drain money because you have to manage it. The huge parking lot like that, you can imagine all the de-icing, all the snow removal, all the gas that's used for that, the maintenance and so forth. Whereas a parking structure, yes, it's going to cost more at the beginning. There's going to be more upfront cost. But imagine the benefits to the employees. Imagine the benefit to not having to plow that every time. Okay, next. And the answer to that will be, okay, what do we do with the storm management? Well, we're not inventing the wheel. This has been done. There's actually a guidance for use of permeable pavement at airports. And this has been used in airports already, in Amsterdam and other parts of the world. Now, the image on the left is a very old image that shows how an alternative way of collecting water can be. There are much better solutions today. It's been really involved. So what we can do is use porous paving, capture the storm water, and then release it slowly back into the prairie. And that's important because the worst water is the first 5-10 minutes of a storm. You get very warm water, you get very polluted water. So if we can take that out of the equation, save it, cool it down, and release it slowly, that will improve conditions very much. And also, this area is the recharge area for the Kishwaukee and the Rock River. These gravel prairies are the recharge zone for our groundwater and for the river. Next slide. I put this slide in because I really have a pet peeve with the waste of parking. This is a project I did in 2012 for the Randall Road corridor. In this project, I had managed to connect, and Chicago is always wanting a north-south railway system. In this project, I managed to connect Joliet to McHenry just using the parking lots of malls that are along Randall Road. I didn't take up any more land. I just said, let's link all these big malls, and lo and behold, we have a huge corridor. We can put rail in there, we can do all kinds of things. And by doing stacked parking, then we can convert all that land into food production, energy production, habitat, recreation areas, anything we can imagine, rather than having it sit there. And you can see by the top slide, it never gets used, except maybe on Christmas Day. It never gets used. So it's a total waste, and it's the worst thing that we can do for the environments, because parking lots are a heat sink and they don't produce anything for anybody. Okay, next slide. So the question that I also asked myself, how could IDNR just take this prairie out of existence? How can they look at this and say, this is not a significant habitat? We only have 21.8 acres of grade A prairie in all of Illinois. How can this not be a significant habitat? And I thought about it and I said, well, maybe one of the reasons is that they see this as a very small parcel, isolated, and they think, okay, it's going to degrade over time. It's not connected to anything. Maybe, we can let it go. But the connection is not hard to make. So what I show there is that we can reconnect this prairie biologically to the Kishwaukee River corridor. By not much expense. All we need to do is connect a little strip that I show from the prairie down to the river. And in historical photographs that I've seen, that stretch was actually pretty wild. It was probably old field, it was leftover land, but it was probably pretty wild until recently. And it's been replaced by lawn. It's been replaced by lawn. They're mowing. They're mowing that area. So we can easily turn that area into a native ecosystem that can link this remnant prairie to the corridor below, to the Kishwaukee corridor. And that would provide a biological link that will help this prairie stay healthy. Next slide. Okay, in ending, so we're talking about land, something outside, right? Something out there. And I urge you to read two books.
Hugh tells me he hopes to go into a hotel room for the night.
I've been out here now.
See, it says your internet connection is unstable.
Hi there. If you can hear yourself, please mute. We can hear you.
Thank you.
Can you move this up? Like you'll see what it says about the, all these environmental groups are really getting involved in this.
Barbara, you need to mute yourself.
Okay, that was a nice break. Okay. So we look at land, and I'm glad, I forgot who wrote the poem last week. I don't know if he's here. Anyway, we tend to look at land as something either to use or to
I don't
sell.
know how you hear it.
And, but there's another way of looking at land, and that has to do with the traditional way that our native people look at land. And if we go back in time, maybe even our pioneers looked at land. And I urge you to read two books by Robin Kimmerer, Gathering Moss, and what's the other one? Right, Braiding Sweetgrass. In it, and Robin Kimmerer is a scientist. She is a very, very strict, strong scientist, but a native person as well. And she combines the two. We can combine the science and the emotional connection to the land. And while I was working on this, and sometimes things just happen, right? So this summer, I finally finished my book on poems called Confluence. And in this book, I wrote a poem about my great uncle Rocco. That's his picture there. I found this picture in an attic in my house in Italy. And on the back, it was stamped Rockford. I had no clue what Rockford was. I thought it was a photo studio. Then when I met my wife, Suzanne, and I moved to Chicago, I noticed, oh, there's Rockford. And when I started to write the poem, I really wanted to find out about my great uncle. Well, he was stationed at Camp Grant. Volunteered for the First World War, and he came to Camp Grant. And what provoked it was that image. I don't know who put that up. I saw it in one of Cassie's slides, and you put it up as well. And I just kept looking at that and wondering, I wonder if my uncle is there. I wonder if my great uncle is among those people. So it brought an emotional attachment for me, for my great uncle. And I can see him having this last image of this land being the prairie before being shipped off to France and dying in the quagmire of the trenches. And that's his grave at Mousargan, American Military Cemetery in France. So for me, personally, it was like a closing of a circle. And I would like to propose that Balboa Prairie become a living memorial to these people that sacrificed their life. That's the place where they started from. And I think that will help, hopefully it will help to preserve the prairie, to give it another meaning. That's part of our history. That's part of our emotional attachment to the land. Okay, that's my presentation. Thank you.
That's great.